everybody. It is, to slate it properly, it is July 30th, late afternoon on Saturday, the first time in a week that we are not uh, overcome by heat. But at any rate, we thought we would put together a special episode of Hour of the Wolf with one of our favorite guests who has been on by phone, but now we're doing this on the Beeline software that I like to use when I have a guest. And he is going to appear now.
Why, hello.
Hello, Terence Taylor.
I'm
Oh,
just sitting here flipping through what may become my favorite book of the year.
yes, okay. Well, we'll be talking about that, and we can show a much better picture of it when the time is here. I was initially, when I invited you to do this week's show, going to talk to you about recent media stuff. But just in the brief discussion that you and I had, there's stuff about this brand new book that is coming out on October. Okay, okay, one second. There. I am there. Oh, that's the book. I want you. You're getting your countdown. Okay.
It's still a
But
nice thing to see.
yeah, but the important thing for your folk to remember. Oh yes. Now just by way of disclaimer and total coincidence in this case, both Terence and I do work for John Joseph Adams. Terence is the host of Nightmare Magazine, which is edited by Wendy Wagner, which is a part of, oh, what's the name? Adamant Press, which is a combination of John's wife, Christy Gant, and I forget the Adam part, but one way or the other, that's one of his many publishing companies.
Yes.
And so here is the book, Out There Screaming, edited by Jordan Peele. How many people out there in radio land don't know who Jordan Peele is? Raise your hand and then be ashamed, be very ashamed. I don't see that much of his stuff because, as Terence knows, even though Terence
You're a
is,
wuss.
uh, uh, yeah, I'm a member of the Wuss Club, sure, at least graphically. God knows when I'm editing, I do post production on Nightmare Magazine. That's my end of that particular thing, uh, especially when somebody writes body horror. I get wussy. I get yuck. But you do the job. And the writing is so good. The narrators are so brilliant that it's fun to do nonetheless. So that's just by way of disclaimer. And so uh, how did, let's first talk a little bit about your background. You have currently two novels out, 66% of the Vampire Testaments, and you're working on the other 33%.
Yes, I have a first draft, which once I get some other things off my plate, I'll be going back to do a rewrite on,
Hmm.
which takes place in what was 20 years later from the second book, which when I finished the second book was 20 years from then, and is now like very close because 10 years have passed for me, and more time for the characters in the novel. But no, I have a first draft I'm very happy with. I get to bring back Zora Neale Hurston uh, as I researched her for the second novel, in which she ended up becoming a major character because that's Zora. She had spent a year working for Paramount Pictures in 1942, just before the beginning of World War, the American involvement in World War II. Just maybe it was 41 to 42 because Pearl Harbor was what year?
41.
So
December
41.
41.
October 41, she started working at Paramount for a year-long contract doing development. And I just had this fantasy of her and her vampire lover from the second novel, Turner, uh, joining forces in LA 10 years later and fighting Nazis and the Klan who are trying to team up to take over America, which sadly, as I did my research, I discovered it pretty much virtually happened, that there was a highly organized separatist group in the Southern California along the Malibu coast for a while. They just took out the last remnants of the compound because tourists kept going up there and falling into like the water pits and everything else they had up there. But that's
Have you titled the third book?
Past Life. I was never really entirely satisfied with the second title because it was oh, you can't have that title, you have to do something different. And but
So all three titles, because when people order it,
Bite
they don't
Marks,
bite marks.
Blood Pressure, and the third, which
Could
is in
change.
progress, Past Life. But yeah, no, I want to wrap those up because I have
And
another
they're
novel,
all part of the
The Vampire
Vampire Testament.
Testaments, which
And if you're looking it up by author, a very good thing to do.
yes,
Taylor is not like a craftsperson with a needle. It's Taylor
yes, Terence with one R
with one R, right?
and
But
three E's, as I like to say.
yeah, indeed. Which is great when you're writing horror because then you just say E about it. Never mind that.
I'll let it pass.
Yeah, please, thank you.
But you know, I also have a short stories in print, which I want to talk about a bit in context of this collection. And I also, I mean, the association with Joseph Adams at this point is less working than volunteering. But I did have for 5 years a review column called "Read This" in Nightmare Magazine,
Is now edited
which
by
which
Wendy N.
which is
Wagner.
who was my editor on the column throughout, even after she became editor in chief. And that association's been an amazing thing. Wendy's just an astounding editor, and working with her for, I didn't even feel like 5 years. I was doing a quarterly column, but
I
over
have
that,
an interview with her that was done in this same means, and people can find that on my YouTube channel.
and she's a delight to talk to. So I'm sure it's very fun. I'll have to go listen to it at some point. But working with her, she was just, what she excelled at was grasping exactly what you were trying to say and simply making suggestions to make that clearer. And over
Mhm.
that 5 years working with her, I just got it honed down my nonfiction writing skills. It got to the point where she said that my column was like her favorite, you know, column on the genre writing that
I have
she'd seen
news
in
for you.
years,
She
which I
said that
thought was,
she wasn't just saying that to you, she was saying that behind your back.
oh my God. You know, and she's largely responsible for that. The kindest thing she ever said, which when I wrote the column where I announced my departure and then wrote the first of the new concept for the series that she had, which were have guest authors. I did the first of those to sort of create a pilot for her, as it were. But she said that the copy editor who worked on the magazine, when she read that column, broke into tears because she loved my column so much, and she was shocked that it was going to end. And I was like, that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. I just, that's, well, the first was the assistant at my agent, Victoria Sanders, the woman who had read the first rewrite of the first vampire novel that ended up being largely the version published with very little changes. She, at some point in the process after it had been bought and we were moving to publication, I was talking to her on the phone. Oh, a little teary there. And she said that very often, that's very seldom that when she's reading manuscripts for work, that it's anything but work. She says, but every now and then she gets something that she starts reading for work and she just keeps reading because she just has to know what happens next. And she just loved the book. And that was what she experienced with my manuscript. And that was like, that's all I ever tried to do,
And
was to
another
create
very
something
discerning person who was,
so
as you will
readable.
remember, collecting all kinds of vampire
Oh,
fiction
Margot,
was
yes, my God.
Margot. That list is still up at npr.org. Her list of, what was it, 300 plus books?
I thought it was only 100, but I'm not sure. That was a while ago.
I remember.
She published on about it though. She published her writings on the vampire books. I remember.
Well, she had a whole book,
Yeah, exactly. And I have to go back and reread that at some point.
and a
But
very good speech was also available on my YouTube channel, uh, called "Why Do Americans Love Vampires?" And by the way, there my YouTube channel is youtube.com /Jim Freund, FREUND /streams. And there's a lot of good stuff there, including footage that Terence had done when we were doing all the New York Review of Science Fiction readings
mm,
live and on camera. Um, and I'm building that up now. We're also on Facebook, but I'm sort of making YouTube my home because it's easier to curate.
sure. Well, the other thing I have to do is I edited together the Leslie portion of the Beyond Blackula readings for ReaderCon this year to be online because I wasn't attending.
That would be
I'm
Leslie
still,
Banks for
yes, LA Banks
LA
professionally.
Banks.
And I'm still largely staying relatively isolated for assorted reasons. I just don't trust this thing to be as done as people seem to think
Same
it
thing
is.
here, and that's why we're doing the readings.
Exactly.
And we're going to be talking about the readings
Yeah,
in a while.
but I have to go back though because now that I've got all the color settings and everything for the Leslie section, I now have everything I need to then cut together the rest of those readings. I want to be able to put that up on the stream there for you. I want to be able to people will see Elia Johnson was one of the readers, Linda Addison. I read, and it was just an amazing evening. It was a packed house thanks to Leslie because her street team just came out in force. But it was a wonderful evening.
We also did a lot
Um,
of radio promotion, if you recall.
yes, but I want to definitely get that together and put that up for people to be able to see as well. I've been
Yeah, that
busy
would
with
be
other work.
a good
Well,
thing.
but going back to my history, so I have a bunch of things in print now. I have a stack of published volumes sitting in a vertical bookshelf in my living room that is now about this tall. That I just added these two books. I also have a short story coming out in David Neal Wilson's Canterbury Nightmares, which is coming out in September, which is a wonderfully twisted collection of people basically uniting at a motel near the Grand Canyon and telling horror stories about their first year of lockdown. And then I also received a copy of the print galley for Out There Screaming, which I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the stories I'm in. I've read Nora's story, N.K. Jemison's story, Reckless Eyeballing, but I have to read Tanana Reeves. The wonderful thing about getting into this collection was that I felt like it's like a family reunion. I know at least two-thirds of the writers, either personally, their friends, or by reputation, or have met them at various things. But it's just such a wonderful thing. So
And once again, the coincidental fact that that is being published by John Joseph Adams is just total coincidence. But
well,
there it is.
yeah, and if anything, I mean, it's very funny because a friend of mine in California told me years ago he was listening to a lot of sci-fi podcasts, and he said that he had been listening to John Joseph Adams on one of these shows that he listened to, and that he had been talking about this story that he'd read
The
called
Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is the one that he actually shows up on.
that was probably, yeah, that sounds familiar, but how the story Plaything, which is my first published story in the Dark Dreams anthology, had struck him and evidently put me on his radar because I just sort of kept glancing off of various things that he did for the next decade, couple of decades. I was in, the light speed sci-fi with I think that's where the essay on Dahlgren ended up. I had a short story in, no, it was the Lightspeed, was the sci-fi fiction collection. But,
Yes,
you
yes.
know, but So when he was doing this anthology, he invited
And
a
and
host
I
of
was in post
writers.
production on that, by the way.
Yeah,
Just
and
to remind people.
he invited a host of black writers to submit to it. I was among them because he knew my work, and I was lucky enough to get in. We were all under an NDA for like a year after, But I submitted the story in January. We had to sign this non-disclosure, and it was just thrilling when I like opened up my email, like, I don't know, a month or so after I'd submitted the story. And the first line was like, thanks so much for the fantastic story you sent. We're including in the collection and going on from there. But being a part of that, you have to understand there's a picture you can show. I started wanting to write fiction in the 80s. I have a trunk of unfinished short stories that I have to go through at some point and salvage pictures of. But back when I started thinking about writing, what you're there was a there doing what they were doing. Let me see that maybe I could as well. I've been working in children's television. I've been a black television writer in kids TV when there was one other, I think, at the time in the 70s. And over the years, that increased. But the basic bottom line is that I was going on a lot of faith with this. I was going on the hope that maybe I could write something. All my influences were old dead white writers who I'd grown up with. Raoul Dahl, Ray Bradbury wasn't dead at that point. John Collier, Saki. These were all these people who later became very problematic to be fans of as we found out more about them and their lives. But we'll save that for another conversation. But the bottom line was, oh yeah, I mean that's a whole. I did a wonderful panel that at Comic Con for Diane. Oh, I haven't talked to her in so long. I kicking myself. I Okay, well that's what I want to keep track of too. But it was on problematic favorites, and it was a wonderful discussion, which I hope someone recorded at some point to find. But at any rate, at the time that I started looking at started writing fiction, not finishing stories, just doing all this stuff, I was largely just going on faith in my own direction. When I was in LA in the 90s, I started going back to that. I'd been writing kids' TV out there, animation. I'd gone out there in the 91, came back in 2001, but the last 2 years that I was in LA, I wasn't happy. I didn't like Los Angeles. The business had changed radically.
You were
So
living in New York prior to that.
yeah, oh, yeah, and I kept my loft and rented it out because I knew I'd never get back into New York, which turned out to be the truth. I mean, my neighborhood now is Park Slope, Gowanus border, and now Gowanus has become as notoriously well-to-do and
Shishi, yeah.
well-heeled as Park Slope. So I mean, it's a great place to age out in. I mean, I can get anything I want within 6 feet of my home. But the bottom line is going back though. Um, When I came back to New York, it was to try to take writing fiction seriously. I tell all the young writers and aging writers and anybody who talks to me about wanting to write, I tell them there's never too late to start. At 47, I came back to New York to finish a vampire novel. I'd started in the 80s. It took me 5 years. I was my mother's primary caregiver during that period. I worked part time. I was able to live cheaply because my loft was paid off and my expense overhead was very low. But I basically finished the book, found an agent who got what I was trying to do, bless her heart, gave me the opportunity to take a year to rewrite it from top to bottom to make it something that was readable because I'd never written a novel. I rewrote it, and what I learned in that year of rewriting bite marks made me the writer that I am. In that process, I found my voice. I found how to use historical information. One of the things I'm proudest of with both the vampire novels and the third is that I did something that I had seen done with Bulgakov in The Master of Margarita, which I'd read as a kid and which unconsciously was a massive influence on everything I've written ever since. In that I was able to take social commentary, blend it with actual contemporary events that were happening, and then go into flashbacks using historical events that reflected on those, but weave in the
And we
fiction and the
should
non.
mention that if you are a fan of Master and Margarita, that Karen Hewler has a book that's very, very influenced. It's called The Splendid City and very much based on Bulgakov.
It's he's been an amazing influence. I run into people every now and then who are as enthusiastic as I am, and found a wonderful T-shirt at ReaderCon one year of the
Yes,
'60s cover of the Master and Margarita with the cat
that
holding the pistol.
yeah,
That ironically, the art for that was done by Little Monster series, a children's book illustrator who did books called Little Monster, who I worked on the adaptation to CD-ROM gaming of several Little Monster books in LA, not knowing that he was the one who had drawn this picture that was such a massive influence in my life. But the book is brilliant. The novel that I wrote basically took the lessons I learned in it and extended them. That's been something that my work has been able to like embrace and do. So I'm very proud of these two stories because they basically are new work done during COVID, but they also basically were both examples of me pushing myself a little bit farther than I have before. One of the things that I realized over the last decade or so was what made certain stories of mine, Plaything, Wet Pain, work better than some of the others, which were good horror stories, but that those specific stories had a very strong social theme of something that meant something very deep to me. And I was able to basically use that in these two stories for the same reason. So I started out in a publishing world that barely would acknowledge my existence. And what's happened is over time, I've seen the rise. The last 20 years has been amazing. A lot of it did start with Cherie Thomas's Dark Matter anthology, where she, for the first time, did a collection of Black writers in science fiction, but not just contemporary. W.E.B. Du Bois. She went back into history,
who
found
knew
things.
that he wrote fantastic fiction, but he did.
Well, we knew because of Cherie. And she
Exactly.
also introduced me to a novel, um, which I wish I'd done more research and put together notes, but Black No More, which is written by a Black writer and a white wife, evidently butted heads with a lot of the other Harlem Renaissance writers for assorted reasons. I won't get into all of that, but he's another problematic favorite. But the book was fascinating. It was basically about these guys who get together this money and they create a machine that will turn Black people white. And I mean, straight hair, skin, features, everything for like $50. And it just does. It's been turned into a musical recently, which I have to track down and see. I think it was by the Roots, one of the guys of the Roots. But it was a fantastic story because it commented so much on the usages of race in politics and funding. There's a wonderful chapter
Which we're
where you,
reaching apex of again.
yes, well, there's a lot of issues, but one of the things, but not, it's a very different thing because what he was talking about was the exploitation of Black misery. So there's a
Mhm.
wonderful scene in the book where you have an analog to Madam C.J. Walker, who makes her money selling hair straighteners and is pissed because all these black people are saving up their money to turn white and they're not buying her products anymore to straighten their hair.
What's the name
You've
of this
got
book?
what?
What's the name and author of this book? It sounds.
Black No More. Black No More. I'd have to look up the author's
Well,
name.
that's enough. That's enough for now.
But it's this meeting, and you have a very sort of you have the political figures who make money off of black misery because you have to give us money to help the poor black people. Universities, all these different groups that essentially are profiting off of black misery and sustaining it for that reason are suddenly being threatened. And it was just brilliant. He dealt
George
with the
Schuyler.
racists who were
George Schuyler.
George Schuyler. He was dealing with the racist white people who were manipulating. But it's an incredible commentary, and it's up there with Bulgakov in terms of how he takes the society. But the bottom line is that there was so much in that first collection that I'd never heard of. So many writers who are contemporary I'd never heard of. She introduced a concept, which was that there were not one or two people out there writing science fiction who were of color, but
Yeah.
there was a community of writers that they were doing very different stories. When you saw all the stories together, you saw the
And,
range of
and
voices.
she brought, as a result of Dark Matter, she brought a lot of people who had been hesitating for their lives, on not writing because how could black people get into science fiction, fantasy, and all that? And her book gave a lot of people the impetus to go. She, by the way, does not acknowledge this. She doesn't fully believe it.
Well, she did.
Let me just, there are very few anthologies that change the history of speculative literature. Um, there was one by Judith Merrill in the late 50s, then Dangerous Visions, edited by Harlan Ellison, Women of Wonder, edited by Pamela Sargent, and there really wasn't anything that changed the temperature that much until Dark Matter.
Yeah.
And I consider it one of the most important books for the literature of speculative fiction. If you know spec fic, you will love it, and it's a keepsake. If you don't, read it and learn.
It's a great introduction, but it put everything into a historic context. It showed that this wasn't anything new, that this had been here all along. At the time, the publishing industry view of Black writers was what they expected was these social dramas about, ghetto life. And if you wrote those, this was one of the issues in the Harlem Renaissance between the writers. If you wrote what they wanted to hear, you got published. If you wrote anything
Mm,
outside of that, you didn't. And it perpetuated a certain image that gangster rap perpetuated about the black community, but other forms of hip hop didn't. And when other forms of hip hop got obliterated by the commercial success of gangster rap because it was the only thing that white teenagers in the suburbs could scare parents raised on Black Flag and heavy metal with. Basically, my feeling was that hip hop became very insular, very directed in one particular direction for purely commercial reasons. So publishing had been doing the same thing. She opened up a door. Brandon Massey then, about 5 years later, published Dark Dreams, and his goal at that time was to do a trilogy, which he accomplished. She did a second Dark Matters book, which was just continued the what she had done with the first. But his collection was
and by the way,
Black.
worth mentioning is the editor, Betsy Mitchell, who had spoken to Cherie and helped give her the idea, who was also Octavia Butler's editor.
But this is that the reason for that is that there's a community of people who were connected by these collections. So the horror collection, I basically, when I came back to New York in 2001, the intention was to finish this novel, this vampire novel. And first question I asked myself when I landed and got off, organized my home and was settling in is like, am I out of my mind? Am I the only black writer out there trying to write horror? So I Googled black horror writers. The first name that came up was Tananarive Due. And I read her first novel, which was wonderful. And at the back of it, in her acknowledgments, the in between, brilliant. I mean, just I won't even go into why that isn't a movie yet. That and The Good House, they just should have been filmed so long ago. But the thing is that she, in her acknowledgments at the end, thanked everybody for reading her book and gave an email address that if you want to get in touch with me, get in touch. I emailed her and we started an email correspondence because I talk a long time. So I wrote a long email and Donna Reed could talk a long time. So she wrote a long reply. So we started this correspondence. I ended up in Europe for a couple of weeks, was sending her pictures of Europe and emails from there. When I got back, she said, "Look, if you're not traveled out, I'm going to be teaching at Howard for a few weeks. Do you want to come down and meet?" So I
Where is
went
it?
down, Howard University
Yeah,
in
where is it?
Washington. Where is it?
Yes, where's
Washington
Howard
D.C.
University?
It was near Washington D.C.
Okay,
It's in that area.
yeah.
So I had a friend in Baltimore. I went down, spent the weekend, and visited. Had lunch with Tananarive, and she told me about Brandon's collection, which was still accepting submissions. And basically, I sent me the information. I submitted the story. There was a blackout in New York, and when the power came back up, there's an email from him accepting the story. And I remember calling her up and going, "Oh my God, I got accepted. Thank you so much. I don't know what you said it to him." And she said, "Well, I didn't say anything to him." She said, "I gave you the information. I said nothing to him in any way, shape, or form." She said, "This is on you. You went in cold and you submitted it and you got accepted. You need to embrace that." Which, I mean, she's just one of the most
Yes. Uh,
insanely generous, supportive people I have ever met. And that's been our relationship since then. I mean, she's just so I
Now,
just a
around
shout
that
out to
time,
Tanana Reed.
okay, now about that time, bearing in mind that we have about 12 minutes left,
Well, yeah, go on.
um,
Which I want to use to talk about the collection, but go
yes,
on.
but I want to use to talk about Cherie Renee Thomas and the New York Review of Science Fiction readings on Tuesday, April 1st at 7 p.m. And there's that same address that I have been mentioning a few
Mhm.
times where you can watch it. You go to YouTube/Jim Freund/streams. If you miss it live, you can, uh, it'll be archived, it'll still be there. But if you are there live, you can ask questions using the chat channel. It'll also be broadcast in uh, on Facebook in the New York Review of Science Fiction readings, otherwise known as NYRSF, NYRSF. And in either of those locations, you can ask questions in the comments and we will select some of them. But the reader on Tuesday, actually, on August 1st, is Barbara Krasnoff. And Cherie was for a while the first, not the first, Cherie was for 2 years, I believe, the curator of the NYRSF readings just before I took it over. I had been recording them from the start, and then I sort of became, the one who chose the curators. And a friend of mine, Carol Cooper, was a curator. She told me about Cherie. Cherie was there for 2 years. Among that, and that's the point at which I met Terence Taylor because she chose him to be one of the readers. She also was the very first person to get Barbara Krasnoff to be a reader anywhere. So that Cherie has had also an important personal impact on all our lives in this room and a great many more out there in the world. So again, Tuesday, August 1st, at 7 p.m. New York time, um, on YouTube and my channel. You can always just go to YouTube and type in my name and follow the links, but look for the one that says live or streams. And on Facebook at the group known as NYRSF Readings live, and it will be archived in both places. Barbara is going to read a story from what I guess is still the current issue of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, for which Cherie, by no small coincidence, is now the editor.
Now, I don't want to cut you off, but I want to know how much time we have left because the
10.
primary reason for my being here is
And
being lost in you describing in detail something that's about to happen, which they should
I
definitely tune in
I am
for.
promoting something that I produce.
Yes, no. I'm just saying that.
And I'm near the end of it, and I'm going to finish it now. The point being that we haven't had Cherie there for a long time. Cherie started you in the reading series. She started Barbara in the reading series. Barbara will read her story, and then Barbara and Cherie will be in conversation together. I am now done with that.
How much time do I have to say what I need to get in?
Up to 10 minutes.
Okay. What I wanted to do is just bring all this back around. The reason I mentioned everything that I said so far is I wanted to set a historical context for the Jordan Peele collection. This is something that is no longer startling or new. It's something that is embraced, I think, by the majority of readers out there. I think that for me personally, there's enormous pride in having been not just a witness, but a part of a sea change in genre writing over the last 20 years. And this collection to me is just, it's kind of a capper on that we're growing from. But out of all the writers, part of the reality is that when I came back to New York, started going to Nurse of Readings and KGB's fantastic fiction series with the meals that happened afterwards, I realized for the first time that when people talk about the sci-fi community, it's an actual community. These people are in the same cities. We go to conventions. We know each other. We converse. We share information. We share ideas, and I became part of a community of writers of color, of different genders, of different backgrounds of all kinds that are bringing such new material out. Nothing is being replaced. All the other writers who are there are still there and doing amazing work. Stephen King will be writing from beyond the grave. We will never not have a new Stephen King novel because he'll have built the AI to continue writing his novels long afterwards. Yes, I mean, they'll keep having children. But he's not a kid. He uses a different name. But at any rate, the bottom line is that the world is changing. We're seeing a lot of backsliding in terms of a lot of right-wing conservative people desperately trying to hold the controls, keep the reins. But everything I see shows that the majority of people on the planet are embracing the idea of the novel, the new. Change, basically, as Octavia put it, change. It's the only constant. It's God. It is what we are here for, is to evolve, to change, to constantly new things. And this to me is just the latest thing. Jordan Peele with Get Out managed to do something brilliant in that he took very familiar existing tropes and completely, by shifting a few key pieces, ran the machine in a different direction. Structurally, he certainly adheres to certain things that we're used to in that genre, but he gave it a whole new flavor and he opened the door to so much. I was watching
He also
Big
revived
Clone,
Twilight Zone.
which I didn't watch more than one or two episodes of because of time spent writing, because there's suddenly all this market out there for writing. But the other thing is that I just lost the train of thought that I was on. Get Out, basic tropes, reviving. The bottom line is that what we've got is people taking things that existed and making them new. We've got people coming up with things that are completely new. This collection I'm looking forward to reading because I know there'll be things that are playing with existing tropes and expanding them beyond what they were capable of, or just coming up with completely, entirely new material that just no one out there was doing. We're in an age of wonder, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm glad to be part of it, a witness, but also just watching all the material, seeing the shows that are coming out. Secret Invasion, I thought, was enormous fun. And part of what they played with was the issues of identity in terms of the scrolls
And
and
they
what
did
does
that
it
even
mean.
more so in the Winter Soldier and Falcon. which really brought up the race issues beautifully. And they're bringing, remember the old guy in that? They're bringing him back into other MCU stuff. He was a precursor to.
Oh, the old guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
The early Captain America.
Yeah.
No, Marvel has done a wonderful job with this. But bottom line is, I looking forward to reading the rest of this anthology. Of all the writers in there, what amazes me is that there were only 5 names that I didn't know. The rest either are friends, they're people I've met at conventions, they're people whose work I've read and reviewed. But it's the roots of what we've built over the last 20 years are so deep at this point, and it's just thrilling. Justin Key, who is part of our writing group, a part of the Tabula Rasa writing group, came in while he was finishing his residency before he went to California to become a shrink, and he was doing this writing. He's left light years since he left, and he's in the collection. So there's very recent writers that I've met recently who have just started publishing in the last few years, and writers like Nora and Tanata Reeves that have been publishing for decades. It's such a range of voices. It's so exciting to me to be a part of it, but it's also just exciting that it exists. It shows that despite the static that we get every day looking at the news, the chaos of the world, the conservatism, the removal of affirmative action programs that essentially made me and gave me opportunities 40 years ago that I might never have had otherwise. The world is still a different place than it was then. And it continues to change whether they like it or not. Slowly, those ways of thinking are going to fall by the wayside. There's going to be a huge upsurge because it always gets worse before it gets better as they fight like rats at a corner, scrabbling to keep control. But books like this, collections like this from writers of all backgrounds, it just shows how much variety there is in the world,
And
how much
it's
more
also
there
ironic
is than we ever saw before.
that
What?
it's also ironic that we're using horror fiction to push back the darkness.
Well, one of the
Political
funniest things to me, and the last note I'll have is how many writers of color have revisited the work of H.P. Lovecraft. To we've all been making money off it. The third vampire novel is Lovecraftian. I just couldn't help myself. I'd covered voodoo, I'd covered witchcraft and everything else. I had to go Lovecraft for the last one. I just finished reading Nora's Second City book. Wonderful climax to those 2 books. But it's literally a Lovecraftian novel. I mean, the main villain is the city of, and I don't know how to pronounce it, R apostrophe Lyeh.
Yeah,
I'd
I
say
just read it to myself.
I say Arlea, Arle. I have to get her to tell me if she's found the pronunciation, but it's a literal avatar of that place, and it's Lovecraftian monsters. I loved it. The Black Tom story that kicked him off. All of these things. Lovecraft Country was a white author, but a black family. I mean, I just find it very funny. That sound you hear is Lovecraft's body just spinning in Providence at every time one of these books comes out. But what it says to me is that all material is valid. Everything gives a seed to something new that can grow from it. And yes, we have problematic writers whose lives may not be great, whose work even at times is problematic. But the what's worth salvaging of that has basically led to books like this. It basically has gotten all the writers in here inspired enough, and the changes have kept us all going to the point that you're just seeing more and more of it, and it's great. I love it more than anything. This is a point of celebration. I would love to get everybody in this book together as Brandon got us all together for his first collection in Baltimore for a group reading, and get a group picture of everybody. But it's something. It would not be easy. They were scattered across the country, but Peele's work has basically us and Nope basically just started going off into new terrain that wasn't trope based. That was just exploring things, but always saying something larger, and that's what I love. That's what genre writing does better than anything else. Leslie said it in the Beyond Blackula reading, that nobody pays attention to what you're doing when you're writing genre, and you can be as radical and be as honest and
Like the
direct
genre
about things.
writers, in Russia, and people like Stanislav Lem, that it just went over everybody's head,
It's
even though they
it's
were writing dialectic.
it's why the Master and Margarita wasn't officially published till after Bulgakov's death, because
Yeah.
he knew he would spend what little was left of it in Siberia. It's a radical, radical book, but it's hilariously entertaining and scary as hell in spots. But that's what genre writing can do. Like the court jester, we can speak the truth to power without the immediate danger that somebody at a level with them could. But we convince the public, and that's the main thing. We change
Okay, now we
the
need
whole thing.
to reiterate what each of us is pushing and wrap up. So first of all,
I
and
think like a shill.
well, you are. I mean, if you're not going to shill your own work
And
and
others.
that
Yep,
has
yep,
other people's work in it,
yep,
you know,
yep.
and it's also I'm also guilty of it, because with the power of WBAI, which again, everybody listening needs your support. Um,
Definitely. That's why we're here.
I'm head chill in this place. The weather's been giving me a head chill. So the first thing to point out, yes, ouch. The first thing to point out is that the book Out There Screaming, edited by Jordan Peele, which has an E on the end of Peele. If you haven't been
For some
familiar,
reason, you've been under a rock and haven't seen it spelled in the last 30 years.
yeah, exactly. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that I need to promote right now is that this Tuesday, August 1st, at 7 p.m. at the New York Review of Science Fiction Readings, which can be found on YouTube. Let me see if I can. Yeah,
Put it up.
I can put
There
it
you
up.
go.
YouTube/Jim Freund. That Freund is FREUND/streams. And Barbara Krasnoff will be reading a story that Cherie Renee Thomas bought for the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. And then the two of them will be in conversation together.
I love that thing.
So this coming Tuesday is going to be a thrill. And if, by the way, you're listening to this as an archive, you can still go to WBAI.org or to that same darned address on YouTube and watch it, listen to it. So everybody, by the way, say hi to Shuri. If you're
Those of you who can see on video, my little muse is sitting on my lap now.
well, she has radio capabilities. Cats do. They have those powers.
Say something. Say something. She's going to be.
Now that you've asked her to do it,
She's never going to
do you
say
expect
anything.
that to happen?
I know.
This is a gorgeous black kitty.
My little Black Panther.
Yeah, she's and she is isn't Shuri now the head of Wakanda? At the end of
Technically, yeah, I think so.
at the end of Wakanda
For the
Forever.
second one, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shuri takes over.
She earned her place.
Yes.
Next, she'll hopefully be changing her policy on vaccination. That's a separate conversation.
The actress has an issue, but you know what? She doesn't go on and on and on tweeting.
I'll give her credit for that.
What she tells her colleagues, people she works with, don't care about that, doesn't affect me. When people go on the platform formerly known as Twitter and tell people do not do the medically proven thing, but she's not doing that anymore. She learned from one person who got barred from a Disney franchise and is not coming back, is now appearing in movies that are produced by, is it Newsmax? He's incredibly right-wing. They just put a movie out that's actually doing rather well.
Is this one about extracting energy from children for right.
Yes,
Yes, I mean,
yes,
which the filmmakers keep saying has nothing to do with QAnon or any of the stuff that their star is claiming it is proof of. And they're like, no, it's a movie. We made a fantasy. This is not evidence of your crazy conspiracy theories. We're sorry we cast you now, Jim.
exactly.
So we'll see where all that goes.
Yeah, as you pointed out, you had a rather good list of names of people where one must separate the art from the artist. I'm a big fan of Richard Wagner, of his operas.
It's brilliant music, and the fact that he became an inspiration for a fascist leader is not his fault, but evidently he was also on the anti-Semitic dick list. So,
Yeah,
you find these things out when the point that these things start coming out, which is the other advantage of the modern age is we don't sit on this stuff anymore. I
and
don't.
Roald Dahl, you mentioned, one of my favorite writers of all time. What a creep!
Yeah. I don't know how much time we have, but the whole story of Patricia
We're
Neal.
over, but yeah, Patricia
Yeah,
Hill.
the whole story about Patricia Neal, and I grew up with this wonderful story about how he nurtured her back from her stroke, and he like pushed her beyond her limits, and then you get the real story, which from her point of view, which is yeah, I'd be sitting at the table and I'd go, "Can I have the salt?" in a slurred voice, and he'd go, "What's that, Patricia? Sorry, you'll have to repeat that. I can't understand what you're saying." And he'd make her say it again and again and again, and then he'd put it just out of reach so she had to stretch. And I'm like, that can be interpreted two ways. That could be a wonderful, loving husband who's pushing his wife to exceed her limits to recover, or a guy who's tormenting a woman who can't do any better, thinking she would never get any better, and he could just have sport with it. And as over the years, it's looking more and more like that's the interpretation of all of that. And she pretty much was saying that in her autobiography.
Yes, she did. She
So,
and she did interviews about that part of it.
yeah, I mean, and what do you say? I
And,
don't
and there are
agree.
people that we would never know. Barbara Krasnoff, who's reading on Tuesday at 7. Barbara Krasnoff was one of the biggest Mary Poppins fans.
Oh,
Now,
tell me. Oh, yes.
and the early Mary Poppins stories, they're no novels, but they're what, about 40 stories? Thereabouts, says Barbara. Um, Originally had words that we would not dare use on the air, racial slurs.
Oh God, well,
And as years went by, she started herself editing those out. And she had a conscience, P.L. Travers. And now they're quite readable. What's not readable were my favorite books, Dr. Doolittle.
oh geez, I haven't read those since I was a kid. What
Yeah,
was I getting inundated with that I didn't know about? I don't even want to know.
you
The
don't
bottom
know.
line is, I think it's great when the author says, "Look, I wrote that then. That's not right now. I'm fixing it." I am less enamored of the idea of rewriting Roald Dahl to make it all nice because if he said nasty things about fat people, that's on him. But we need to leave it. I mean, it's like taking the N word out of Huckleberry Finn. There was a reason that word was there. It wasn't thrown in casually. Twain was making social commentary, and that was how people spoke. And by saying this, he established something for future generations to learn from. I think, as with the Confederate statues being torn down, you need to leave the dirt and you need to contextualize it. You need to put a plaque on those statues saying this was a traitor to the American dream. They had to leave this, this, and this. And in this period of time, this was put up as a tribute, but it was wrong. To take it away and hide it only gives power and fuel to the people who protest that and say we're being replaced, we're losing our heritage, blah, 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 blah. I had a conversation with a voiceover person the other day, and the thing that occurred to me is in the midst of all these things where they're trying to ban any kind of actual accurate history of anything involving negative aspects of the United States history from being taught in schools, that the reality is that what we should do is continue to teach all those things, but add to that curriculum the good things that this country has
And
done.
let me, by the way, tell everybody to read sort of the counter book to that. I'm rereading it right now, called These Truths, A History of the United States, written by Jill Lepore, Lepore, who is one of the most brilliant historians out there. She lectures at Harvard. She teaches at Harvard. She writes for the New York Times, and she's a staff writer for the New Yorker. But she wrote this history, 900-page, for the U.S. You can actually look her up on YouTube and see some wonderful stuff. She also wrote, by the way, a biography of Chester Moulton and how he and his two wives created Wonder Woman.
They made a movie about that.
And it's based on her book.
No, I know that. Yeah, that's the only way they got the story.
So the point is that the countertale to what these people are trying to say, Lepore published about 6 years ago.
Well, the thing is that there are two sides, and you can show a full picture of the United States history. The fact that the country is largely built on slavery is a fact that's very hard to deny, especially when you find all the bodies underneath City Hall and things like that when you're excavating. But the fact that this country also managed to build up and sustain and largely implement the civil rights movement to redeem itself, to undo the damage done. Now, the damage hasn't been undone, and that's part of the issue. We want to get into reparations or anything like that. And right now we've got our far right trying to undo whatever good was done in the 60s, to undo the damage of the previous years. But I used to say slavery was 200 years ago at a certain point in this country. That's like 5 generations to get rid of something.
1619, according to...
What I'm saying, since the end of slavery. End of slavery is not 1619. The end of slavery is whatever the Emancipation Proclamation was, but there was a point from the 13th Amendment that basically there was 200 years. The fact that there were only 200 years between that event and me being property in this country and me being somebody who can do the things that we've been discussing for the last hour is, to me, a wonderful, is part of why I still love America, because it's malleable and can change. The fact that it's changing back, and we've got people trying to get into power who would just as soon form a constitutional Congress and eliminate the 13th Amendment and put us all back, is horrifying to me. But the fact that it's being protested by people who don't agree with that helps to redeem it again. But we can't erase the negative history of the United States. There's so much of it, but we can balance it with the positive things this country has done.
And we can also teach people to learn it. As Lepore points out, they have no problem in Germany teaching the Holocaust.
That's because they kind of know that they better, because if they don't, it's going to happen again. And there are people that would be perfectly happy. And that has to happen here. The people who don't want to teach about slavery and how all that happened, first of all, I mean, I would like to think it wouldn't happen again, but who the hell knows? The bottom line, though, is you can't just say, and then we stepped into this wonderful land that it was all waiting for us. There was so much that happened for this country to be built. From the beginning, the competing countries that were fighting over it, to what got us to where we are. That's an amazing story. Look at where we are. I mean, I still feel that America is the greatest country for me to live in. I can't say it's the greatest country in the world, but it made me. I could not exist in the form that I am with the mind that I have, having been raised anywhere else. And part of that was me spending a lot of time out of the country on the U.S. government's dime in the Air Force as a brat, seeing other countries and learning that when I hit my 20s, I could go to Europe because that wasn't a scary thing. Everything I am, this country shaped and made me by virtue of the limitations, but also the opportunities that it gave me. And I could never not be anything but American. I would not go to Canada to be Canadian. I don't want to live in another country. My sisters were born in France. They had the option at 18 of being French or American, and they chose America. I mean, this is who we are. And also, the thing is, we need to be able to be a part of that. And the people
fact
trying
that
to take us out of that picture,
America and the policies that it allows, is what allows us to have WBAI and Pacific Radio, which you folks listening need to help support
Yep.
by either calling 212-209-2950 or going to the web to wbai.org, or even better, more directly, give to wbai.org.
Yep.
That's the URL. And that's what makes programs like this one, which is unique, possible.
Yep.
And that again segues perfectly from what Terence was talking about. There's a lot of great broadcasting around the world, but and public radio does good stuff. Public radio is not like Pacifica Radio. We're unique, and I hope that you folks will support us. So,
We should wrap so you have time to cut this down for air.
Yes, exactly. Which I will be doing. We're exactly 1 hour in a 55-minute show where I also have to promote the reading, play a movie review, and other things. But all of this will continue to be alive or recorded on YouTube as you folk
Or
are
on video.
watching. This part of the conversation will never be lost, and we can expand on it at some point. I would very much like to do that.
Yes, there are a few points I'd like to pick up in later shows. So.
Yeah, absolutely. People to thank, starting with Samuel R. Delaney, who I did not get to mention when Terence pointed out the meeting of him. He was the first person I worked for at WBAI when he was doing his radio version of The Star Pit. And Octavia is somebody who I had on the show maybe 5 times, the last one of which was about 2.5 months before she died. And that's an hour 45-minute interview, which we occasionally make available as a premium on WBAI. These were 2 amazing people. I'm glad they got Terence Taylor, the impetus.
And gave me the family photo that I always wanted.
Yeah, exactly. And when we go out, you want to go out with a picture of the book or a picture of the 3 of you?
Well, I want to go out with a quick thank you because part of this photo is part of the reason, and we'll put up the book. What the hell? Let's promote. But it's part of the reason I was so thrilled to be a part of the 75th birthday event for Chip, and learned that it's Chip and not Sam in person, and to not make that mistake anymore. But yeah, I mean, it meant so much to me to be able to both pay honor to his work to him in person, and to be able to get a picture of him with me at 75 that will be framed up next to the photo of him and me with Octavia on my wall at some point when I get
And
around
he's
to
now 80,
creating that.
because that was 5 years
ago. I know. It's
frightening,
it's
isn't
like,
it?
look, I spent the weekend with my 90-year-old dad who's doing great. Chip's got, he could be with us for, and hopefully sometime
Let
to
us
come.
hope. Let us hope.
We could get another decade out of him. At least, and my dad's the example. We can get at least a good decade out of him, and it would be a fabulous thing.
Okay, so do we have the 75th birthday that, yes, you recorded and edited, but I produced?
I sent you back the video and a link to it.
You
so
did?
I think
Okay.
you put it back up on the,
I don't know if I put it back up yet. I
check it because I make sure I did. I know I exported a version. I'm pretty sure I sent you a Handbrake compression of it for streaming. If you don't have it, I've got it on a drive here. But I remember 6 months ago.
I pretty much remember you're sending it to me, so I've got it somewhere. And again, it'll be in that same location on YouTube, except instead of streams, it'll be no, it will be in streams. Some of these other things, when they're actually happening, will be in live. YouTube is a very strange place to be organizing stuff. You'd think that Google would know better, but no. So And one thing we haven't mentioned out there screaming, yeah, you're going to have to wait till October 3rd.
Oh my God, yes.
But
Pre-order.
you exactly. You can
They
order.
want people to know that.
Let me
Yes.
do the shilling. You're a part of it.
I thought I
I'm
was a
not. So
show.
yes, pre-order. You can go uh, to your favorite online bookstore, and you can order the book right now. The name Jordan Peele alone is enough to attract buyers. The rest of very weird and interesting cover, by the way.
I love the cover. I love the
Yeah.
cover. Yeah.
So so there's that Tuesday, the reading, and Terence, you're going to be back on the show. Now, how many times have you done the show, not counting Yursuf readings? I would say 8.
That many? I don't know. It's possible. It's been decades.
Well,
God
it's
knows.
been 2
I have
decades.
no memory of these things. So
You came to New York. I
I
met you in 2001.
yes, at the Octavia Tribute at the New York Public Library over at the yeah. Now
No, actually, I met you when you read for Cherie.
I think that was after the event though, because I
I
remember
was
her introducing me
I
to
was in the
you at
back
the
of the
NYPL
room in that event with my recording equipment. I spoke to nobody.
at the New York Public Library.
Right.
I beg to differ. I had a she walked me over to you. We had a conversation, but we won't take up time with that. We'll debate that later over drinks. There was something else I was going to say, but I can't think what it was now.
Yeah.
But pre-order October 3rd, it comes out. Grab it while you can before it goes into second printing.
And
So you
we
get the
may well
first,
rebroadcast this interview about
yeah.
that time.
And we will discuss issues brought up in this show and other shows.
Yes,
So,
and that will
at
be
greater length.
separate. Some of that will be separate material,
Yeah.
separate shows. But again, Terence Taylor, Taylor. Get that brand and ask for it by name.
Yep.
And I think for right now, other than saying thank you, that's all there is to be said. And here come the sirens.
I was going to say just in time as the ambulances or cops start gathering to come and
Let's
collect me, I
just
guess.
hope
So,
they're not stopping near you.
believe me, there was one night where I was sitting here and they called me because there were like 5 fire trucks dealing with a fire next door. And the fire marshal called up to say, "Are you okay? Because there's a big fire next door." That's the downside of blackout blinds. I had not noticed any of this while watching TV with my headphones on. So
Okay.
I've learned to be more observant.
So again, thank you.
Thank you. And
And
I will see you again soon.
okay, do not hang up.
I won't.
Although I'll be taking you off screen. Right. There he goes. And now I'm going to thank all the listeners offline at the end of the show. So that's all you need to know. Take care. Have a great week. Yes, and you are not. Let me mute. Now I'm trying to